All right, so we left off with natural changes to an ecosystem. So we talked about human changes, artificial changes. Normally, those are pretty bad because they start like this fast succession process. So we'll talk about succession here. Succession, this is something to remember, is a gradual transition of an ecosystem, usually due to some sort of event. So they're forced by changes to plants and animals living in an area, changes to the inorganic living or non-living environment, excuse me. Inorganic means non-living. And then just like human-induced changes, we do all sorts of weird stuff to environments for reasons and for no reason sometimes. Okay, so succession only occurs when factors affecting an ecosystem change. So you have to have something changing the ecosystem for succession to occur. And that change, it has to be induced by some sort of event. Okay, so succession benefits. We're going to talk about like usually after succession, usually natural succession, you get more productive ecosystems. And those productive ecosystems will maintain or increase certain traits over a period of time. So they will adapt. So these ecosystems are kind of like living organisms almost because they do adapt or they change to a point where they cannot be brought back. So that ecosystem would be extinct at that point. So that's just a different way of thinking about things. In those productive ecosystems that maintain or increase certain beneficial traits, they're going to get increased biodiversity. So that's just more species of just more varied species is biodiversity, is the variation of species. So, you know, if you have 5,000 wolves in an area, that's only one species. That's not a lot of biodiversity. If you have 500 wolves, 500 cats, 500 foxes, 500 geese, that's a lot of biodiversity. That's good. There's a lot of things changing. You get a lot of homeostasis that way, which is just like the stabilization of a system. So what else happens with succession? A benefit of that is symbiosis among species. So that's kind of like with Darwin's finches. They all were different species. They all kind of changed eventually to the point where they were different species, but they're symbiotic because they live in that same area. They just use the resources at different times. And then you'll get things like those little birds that pick like alligators' teeth, that type of thing. That's symbiosis. You know, symbiosis can also be parasitism. So, you know, it's not always a good thing for all of the species. And then you're going to get synergy with other ecosystems. So most ecosystems overlap. Pretty much all of them do. There are a few small ecosystems that don't quite overlap with other ones, but most overlap. So you're going to have this synergy where, you know, where they get that overlapping part, they're going to have to both be able to mold and mesh with each other, or else, you know, that whole system is going to basically die. So here's just a nice little succession picture. So imagine if this was northern Canada. So northern Canada is kind of a tundra at this point, but imagine with global warming, it becomes this nice fertile wetland area. So previously there was just a lot of permafrost, some really low shrubs, wolves maybe, but with global warming and this succession process, it brought in this nice little riparian floodplain, which is just an inundation of water. And then all of these other species kind of come in. So there are pioneer species and secondary species. Pioneer species come in really quickly. They kind of take over like these cattails, and they're super successful in that area. And then secondary species are going to be like this deer here. It comes in once this habitat has kind of stabilized itself through succession. And then it will add to the certain factors, you know, then predators will come with it, that type of thing. So this is just a really good little graphic of succession if you have a good imagination. All right, so disadvantages of succession. I don't know, natural disasters, they're not really necessarily that great of a thing, but a lot of the times they force an area into succession. So we're thinking like forest fires, landslides, floods, volcanic eruptions, etc. It says disadvantages here, but that's natural succession. So a lot of the times with natural succession, that environment is going to be able to have some sort of homeostasis. It's going to be able to stabilize itself because the rate at which the succession is occurring isn't really affected too much by humans. So the rate isn't changing all that much. So it's going to be a relatively stable succession. So with these natural disasters, the forest fire is going to clear out that whole forest area. Then you're going to get pioneer species, which are like little teeny plants that don't require all that much carbon or energy to grow. So they come in real fast, they grow all over, and then eventually trees are going to start to grow, and those are secondary succession, secondary species. So those natural disasters cause very abrupt succession. Quick changes are normally bad for ecosystems because humans impact a lot most ecosystems, and we usually increase the rate at which that change is occurring. But if it's natural succession, these quick changes are okay because it's a natural setting, so you're going to get these cyclical types of succession things happening where you get the pioneer species and then you get the secondary species, and then that whole ecosystem kind of builds itself up again, and usually that takes a pretty good amount of time. So that's why natural isn't normally all that bad, but artificial succession is normally pretty bad. So here's just a good graphic of like little feedback mechanisms for succession and disturbances. So we've got this equilibrium here. Right in here is that equilibrium. So you're getting stress into the system, and with too much stress, you're going to cause this negative feedback loop. That negative feedback loop is going to cause this like crazy, I don't know, change. There's going to be a change at some point. It's going to hit the lower limit. It's going to hit the higher limit of capacity for that ecosystem to change. And then we're going to eventually get some sort of positive feedback loop, which, if you remember, aren't normally all that great. They cause instability. So this positive feedback loop is going to cause probably an increase in one species, and then all the other species are going to have a collapse, and that same species as well. And then on the other side, we're going to get another positive feedback loop with less stress, so less disturbances. So again, only one species is kind of going to dominate that area. We're going to get this positive feedback loop, and then there's going to be a collapse in the system. So you kind of want to be right in the middle here with like normal stresses, normal disturbances. That's why forest fires are generally okay. The problem is we have these crazy, insane forest fires every year that destroy like this whole broad area because of Smokey the Bear. We have all this dead timber basically that hasn't been hit by a forest fire. So then that kind of increases the energy in that system to use. So natural forest fires are actually generally okay. They cause this equilibrium, a little bit of stress here, and then, but just not too much. Because when you get too much, then you get that positive feedback loop and a collapse of the system. And then here's just another really good one to think about. So if we disrupt the homeostasis, like down here it says, imagine if foxes were no longer there. You see all these arrows pointing towards fox. You're going to get more rabbits, more squirrels, more rice, more birds. With more of those, there's going to be more competition between them. The one that's the best at living in this area is going to succeed. The hawks and the owls will probably see an increase in population as well. And then you're going to see a decrease in population between these things that the hawks and the owls eat. So there's just this really, really balance, really great balance that most natural systems have, that if humans mostly come in and take something out, then that really messes up the balance in that ecosystem. So just something to think about. Okay, and then here's another, this is the disturbance population growth model. So you don't want no disturbances. So humans do that where, like I said with the forest fires, we cause no disturbances because we don't want any forest fires. So then you're going to get this horrible variation in species, really bad biodiversity. And then if you get too many forest fires or really, really crazy ones, you're going to get this bad species diversity as well. So what you want is natural, naturally occurring disturbances, but not too many of them. So there's that really good little area here where there's not too many disturbances, but there's just enough to cause this homeostasis to keep occurring. Okay, so short-term changes. It's just important to know that the natural world is constantly changing. It's always, always changing. You know, we have laws, we have things that never change, like gravity, but everything else in the biosphere that isn't a law, scientific law, it's subject to change. So we have observable short-term changes, and they are most often cyclical and predictable. So we're talking about like day and night, your sleep cycle, the monthly tidal cycle, the change of seasons, the growth, reproduction, and death cycle. All these things we can generally kind of predict. The tidal cycle has changed over thousands of years, but we're able to predict like how it's going to change or what to expect at the end of the month. We're going to get like that full moon period. So there are benefits of short-term change and disturbance. It creates stability. So that's in that natural environment. Right back here, we get that stability with disturbances. If the change isn't catastrophic or if humans don't interfere, because humans, usually with our interference, we increase the rate at which things happen. So that's mainly what we're talking about with global warming and climate change, is we are increasing the rate at which the Earth is warming, and it's changing all of these climates too fast for any of the species to be able to handle. So that's why we're seeing this crazy extinction rate. The extinction rate now is 10,000 times higher than it ever was in natural history. So that's something to think about. We're definitely affecting things on this Earth negatively. So disadvantages when humans interfere, which we do with nearly every ecosystem. We are in every ecosystem, so we change the stability of everything. So that's something to think about. You know, even like walking off of the trail, that's changing an ecosystem. You're leading to more weathering. You could step on an anthill. You don't know how that anthill is interacting with the environment around it. So just make sure that you're cognizant and you're always thinking about the environment around you, because we have one Earth. It's your only home. You don't go around destroying your home. So just think about that. And then some long-term changes for that succession and changes in the environments are going to cause like evolution. So things are going to have to adapt and they will change. The only problem with this is that we are changing things in a really, really fast rate, like I said. So the long-term changes, they don't really happen all that much anymore because everything's happening so quickly. If you think about it, the past 100 years, our climates have changed drastically, and the heat, the temperature in the system has changed drastically. So we're not talking about long-term changes anymore. We're talking about from one year to the next, which is, you know, it's almost impossible for species to adapt that quickly. We're really good at it because we can make technology. So that's pretty much the only reason why we can live in places that are normally uninhabitable. And so just right here, think about this. This was 1 year. This whole area is a large ecosystem. This coral reef is a very large ecosystem. There's tons of things living in there, but in 1 year, it was destroyed. So this whole ecosystem has been completely abandoned, and you only have one species anymore, and that's that algae covering the coral. So, you know, just food for thought. If you have any questions, let me know. I can give you more information on pretty much anything science related. So you got to let me know. And otherwise, have a great week.